Project 4.1 was the designation for a medical study conducted by the United States of those residents of the Marshall Islands exposed to radioactive fallout from the March 1, 1954 Castle Bravo nuclear test at Bikini Atoll, which had an unexpectedly large yield. For the first decade after the test, the effects were ambiguous and statistically difficult to correlate to radiation exposure. Miscarriages and stillbirths among exposed Rongelap women doubled in the first 5 years after the accident, but then returned to normal. Some developmental difficulties and impaired growth appeared in children, but in no clear-cut pattern. In the decades that followed, though, the effects were undeniable. Children began to suffer disproportionately from thyroid cancer, due to exposure to radioiodines, and almost a third of those exposed developed neoplasms by 1974. As a Department of Energy committee writing on the human radiation experiments wrote, it appears to have been almost immediately apparent to the EC in the Joint Task Force running the Castle series that research on radiation effects could be done in conjunction with the medical treatment of the exposed populations. The Doe report also concluded that the dual purpose of what is now a Doe medical program has led to a view by the Marshallies that they were being used as guinea pigs in a radiation experiment. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was a clinical study conducted between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama, in which 399, plus 201 control group without syphilis, poor and mostly illiterate African American sharecroppers were denied treatment for syphilis. This study became notorious because it was conducted without due care to its subjects, and led to major changes in how patients are protected in clinical studies. Individuals enrolled in the Tuskegee syphilis study did not give informed consent and were not informed of their diagnosis. Instead, they were told they had bad blood and could receive free medical treatment, rides to the clinic, meals and burial insurance in case of death in return for participating. In 1932, when the study started, standard treatments for syphilis were toxic, dangerous, and of questionable effectiveness. Part of the original goal of the study was to determine if patients were better off not being treated with these toxic remedies. For many participants, treatment was intentionally denied. Many patients were lied to and given placebo treatments in order to observe the fatal progression of the disease. By the end of the study, only 74 of the test subjects were still alive. 28 of the men had died directly of syphilis. 100 were dead of related complications, 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children had been born with congenital syphilis. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that undertook lethal human experimentation during the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945, and World War II. It was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes carried out by Japanese personnel. Some of the numerous atrocities committed by the Commander Shiro Ishii and others under his command in Unit 731 include vivisection of living people, including pregnant women who were impregnated by the doctors. Prisoners had limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their body. Some prisoners had parts of their bodies frozen and thawed to study the resulting untreated gangrene. Humans were also used as living test cases for grenades and flamethrowers. Prisoners were injected with strains of diseases, disguised as vaccinations, to study their effects. To study the effects of untreated venereal diseases, male and female prisoners were deliberately infected with syphilis and gonorrhea via rape, then studied. Having been granted immunity by the American occupation authorities at the end of the war, He never spent any time in jail for his crimes and died at the age of 67 of throat cancer.